Canada, in the beginning, was private property. It belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company in England. In 1870, the land was transferred to the new nation of Canada, which granted the rights to its natural resources to privately owned companies. The Indians were expropriated and stuck on reservations. The white workforce labored long and hard for a pittance. We are inside the Canadian Shield, somewhere in the mines south of Hudson's Bay, the source of creek waters of Canada's mineral production. Copper for electricity, silver for photography, nickel for war, and gold for dictators on the run. I was born in the mining town of Noranda, but the world of mining is a mystery to me. Maybe for some of you too, no surprise. The mines are up north, far from cities, even north of cottage country, and underground where no one wants to go, the refuge of long-forgotten dead. No one talks about mining unless there's an accident or the price of gold goes through the roof. In the old days, men worked underground because they had no choice. Today, it's for the fat paychecks. You don't know anything about mines? Well, mines don't talk much, especially about their history. In the late 1800s, Métis leader Louis Riel was hanged, and 8 Indian Grand Chiefs were buried in a common grave in Alberta, leaving the land unoccupied. At the same time, the railroad arrived at Saint-Anne-des-Pins, now called Sudbury. A dynamite blast uncovered what looked like a major copper deposit. There was almost no mining expertise in the country. The money came from Ohio, and the metal went to New Jersey to be refined. A new company was founded, the Canadian Copper Company. Copper ore always contains a lot of sulfur, which was no use to anyone. So they piled the ore on logs from the local forest and set it on fire. The sulfur burned for months in the open air. These sites became known as sintering fields. The laborers were new immigrants from Europe. No one else would take the job. Something else. In this region, copper occurs together with a strange white metal, Kupfernickel, a German word that means devil's copper. Lots of Kupfernickel. They didn't know what to do with it until in 1889, Scotsman James Riley discovered that nickel added to steel makes it rust-proof. Stainless steel. And Sudbury, Ontario, was the only place in the Western world with nickel. The U.S. Navy's steel-plated battleships pursued the Spaniards to their last American colony, Cuba, with all its sugar. One by one, the Spanish ships were sunk as in the game of battleship. War Minister Theodore Roosevelt declared, "The taste of empire is in the mouth of the people, even as the taste of blood in the jungle." The Americans chased the Spaniards all the way to the Philippines, where they killed between 200,000 and 600,000 people. The Navy didn't lose a single ship. Nickel had done the trick. Now, the armies of the world knew that future wars would be won with nickel from the Sudbury mines. In fact, Germany offered to buy its entire production. American banker and magnate J.P. Morgan, who inspired the Mr. Monopoly character in the popular game, controlled the railroad and steel industries. In 1902, he absorbed the Canadian Copper Company to form Inco. His empire handled 12 times more cash than the annual budget of the United States. The Americans didn't need an army to invade Canada. They did it with cash. All they needed was to grease the palms of Canadian politicians, including Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who cashed a $5,000 check from Inco as a personal dividend. 200 kilometers north of Sudbury, in Cobalt, a railroad crew struck a vein of pure silver. On May 27, 1906, the New York Times screened Cobalt, New El Dorado. It was a classic unbridled rush. Thousands of adventurers and prospectors came from everywhere, even from the famous Klondike, whose glory days were coming to an end. Since silver metal is mostly found on the surface, exploiting a mine doesn't require a large investment. The poor Canadian capitalists would now make their entry into the mining world and run it in English. Labor was carried out by European immigrants, mostly from Finland, where they fled the revolution, and from Italy, where they fled abject poverty. No one spoke English. The various ethnic groups were kept apart to discourage any attempt at unionizing. Nevertheless, this work paid 3 times more than in rural Europe. They dreamed of making a bundle of cash and returning home, but it was just a pipe dream. 6.5 days a week, 10 hours a day, dynamiting by candlelight. They moved tons of rock. There was no ventilation. Their lungs were clogged with dust from the pneumatic drills, nicknamed Widowmakers. 40% of the miners suffered from incurable silicosis. Fatal accidents occurred repeatedly. The maximum fine for fatal negligence was $100. Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier gratified them with a visit. He told them, "All we ask of you is to give the best of your humanity." The miners of Cobalt eagerly complied. Their average life expectancy was 46 years. Those men never did anything else but dig their own graves. Cobalt. 40 silver mines were started in a very small area. The locality wasn't zoned. The town was built around a lake that would eventually be emptied to dig a mine. It was the town's main source of drinking water. Garbage wasn't collected. There was one toilet for 25 people. In 1906, while Cobalt exported $2 million worth of silver bars, the tiny city council only had $5,000 to get the place more or less organized. 3 years later, the town burned down. A typhoid epidemic infected 1,000 people, killing over 200. All those efforts for the glory of England, who purchased Cobalt's entire silver production to fund its army's occupation in India. Nothing remains of this pretty ghost town, which saw His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, honor it with his presence, and witness its hockey team, the Silver Kings, beat the Montreal Canadiens on their home ice in February 1909.
Sing a little song of Cobalt. If you don't live there, it's your fault. Oh, you Cobalt, where the wintry breezes blow, where all the silver comes from, and you live a life and then some. Oh, you Cobalt, you're the best old town. Yes, the greatest town. You're the best old town that I know.
nothing remains except the silver arsenic that continues to flow into Lake Temiskaming. 2 million kilos to date. 1909, the Ontario government let it be known that its geologists might have identified a mineral anomaly even further north, 50 kilometers away from the tracks, in the heart of the bush, in the midst of swamps and black flies. The prospectors rushed in. A prospector would drive his mineral claim stake where no one else had yet planted theirs and rushed over to the nearest government office to register his small personal hectare, his claim. This claim, obtained for a few pennies, certified that he owned the rights to the subsoil. He would have to carry out a minimum of exploration each year, but mostly he would concentrate on praying to God that some millionaire would come along and turn his small hectare into a real mine. The prospector would gladly sell him the claim. This method remains identical to this day. These are the prospectors sitting on their claims, waiting for mine developers. They won't wait long. They're sitting on veins of pure gold. Gold. Canadian mine owners from Cobalt also rushed in to buy claims for a few $1,000s. One of them gave his name to the new town that had just been born, Timmins. Here are 3 legendary mines side by side, the Hollinger, the McIntyre, and the Dome, still operating after 100 years and for 100 years to come. Gold, an exciting metal with few practical uses, turned into jewelry, liturgical vessels, gold ingots. 7 times more gold was extracted in Timmins than in the entire history of the Klondike. That gold still exists. Today it's worth $100 billion. In November 1912, the British Empire's wealthiest mine, the Hollinger, imposed a salary cut on its miners. This directive was also followed by the 12 surrounding mines. Rebellion. 5,000 men stopped working. The strike was led by the Wobblies, an American revolutionary trade union determined to set up a union somewhere in the northern mining region. You can see them here in prison. The mines hired Pinkerton Guards, a private American police force. They shot into the crowd. The miners blocked the railway to prevent scabs from entering, but by the same token, blocked their own supply route. Starving, they returned to work at the end of winter. Deportation awaited many of them. The mining industry could thus continue to prosper in peace and in war. When World War I broke out, Inco's mines controlled 80% of the world's nickel. As a part of the British Empire, Canada sent troops, but the United States did not, remaining neutral for a time. Inco's New Jersey refinery continued to sell nickel to the British Army, while also selling 40% of its production to Britain's enemy, Germany. And that's how, during the Battle of Vimy, soldiers from Sudbury were shot at with bullets plated with nickel from their own mines. Public opinion in Canada was outraged. In August 1916, the public also learned that the German submarine Deutschland left the port of Baltimore loaded with 340 tons of nickel from Sudbury. For the first and last time, public opinion called for the nationalization of the industry. And then the boys came home. By the end of the war, Sudbury's landscape had been stripped of all its topsoil. A soldier noted, "It looks just like the battlefields overseas." The term environment didn't yet exist at the beginning of the 20th century. Pure profit was the only value that counted. The returns from the mines in the first half of the century were exceptional. There was cash to invest, and exploration in the north had only begun. Prospectors now followed an immense seam of metal called the Cadillac Fault, which led to the opening of about 100 mines on either side of the Quebec-Ontario border. Prospector Edmund Horn crossed the Quebec border into the region of Rouen and discovered a copper deposit the size of Montreal's Place Ville-Marie, large enough to build a smelter on the site. There was no one around, not even Indians. This time, the financiers wouldn't let the fortune hunters have the run of the place as they'd had in cobalt. In 1926, Quebec passed a special law allowing the new copper kings to design and manage their own town, which would follow the exact contour of the mining concession. The mine manager would act as a mayor and police chief of the new mining town, to be called Noranda. The mining law was amended for the circumstances. The company town was exempted from all forms of taxes for 15 years. The law also specified that no landowner, tenant, or occupant in the district of Rouen could claim damages caused by noxious gases and smoke produced during the operation of a smelter. Thus, Noranda would control its own subsoil, soil, and sky. And that's how Quebec quietly became the best place in the world to invest in mining. You can't break the law when you are the law. Those who didn't find jobs in the mines would spend the Depression years at the gates of the mining concession, forming the town of Rouen. Gold producers didn't feel the Great Depression at all. When currency is devalued, those who have a lot of it exchange it for gold bars. And that's still the case today. During the Great Depression, the American Congress increased the value of an ounce of gold by 40% in order to boost the value of its reserves. This would translate to pure profit for the already prosperous mines in Timmins. And now they were rolling in dough, pumping out profits day and night. There was even enough left over for the town's poor, who received food baskets crowned by a somewhat ambiguous gift, a turkey. Lots of turkeys for lots of poor people. These shacks were home to miners' widows and orphans. They won't be coming out to display their misery for the camera. Beginning in 1920, mining company bosses joined together to form the Ontario Mining Association. Among other topics they discussed were miners' salaries and working conditions. Yet the miners' associations were still not recognized. Once again, they would be roundly defeated in strikes at Noranda and Curtin Lake. One thing for certain though, workers would no longer settle for Christmas turkeys. Increasingly, in the early 30s, they began meeting openly in the streets on May Day to demonstrate International Workers' Day, as you can see here in Timmins. They are probably still in turmoil over the tragedy that occurred not so long ago when a fire broke out deep in the Hollinger mine. No mine in Ontario had a rescue team on site. They called in the nearest rescue team, which arrived from Pennsylvania 22 hours later. 39 men were already dead by asphyxiation. The miners were buried in a common grave. The employees chipped in to erect this monument. It also bears witness to their budding solidarity, which would take another 15 years to shape itself into a real union.
To supply the increasing demands, it has been necessary to open several additional mines, and this district is now recognized as the greatest source of nickel in the world.
The mining industry was now ready for the great rearmament, and the German army was still a good client. A proliferation of nickel mines would spring up in this ancient meteorite crater that constitutes the Sudbury Basin. Falconbridge, a new financial group, began exploiting a series of deposits that Thomas Edison, inventor of the electric chair, at once prospected in vain. Guess he didn't have enough light. The United States was preoccupied by this geographical nickel monopoly. Just in case, the Americans had a plan up their sleeve to invade the city of Sudbury from Minnesota and seize its mineral deposits. The importance of the city was underlined when George VI visited on June 3, 1939. The miners were nervous as they watched his queen descend into the mine shaft, since it was supposed to be bad luck for women to go underground. They were right. 3 months later, World War II broke out.
Catch the cage down, boys, when the sun starts to shine. 3 rings of the bell will get you the bottom of the mine. Walk down the drift past the roar of the fans for another day drilling, getting ready to blast. 'Cause we are soldiers in the war underground, and we fight every day for nickel, copper, and gold. We are soldiers in the war down below, and the dust and the diesel is our greatest foe. We are soldiers in the war down below. We fight every day for copper and gold.
It's just smoky, dusty, dark. Everywhere where your light isn't, it's dark, and open holes. You're always watching for open holes. You're walking around there looking at the cracks above your head, wondering if they're going to fall on you. And sometimes chunks fall, and you hear grinding, groaning in the ore body moving. It's a scary place. You go in there, it's 40, 45 Celsius in the mine sometimes. And you got to work, bull work.
They tackled the richest deposits. 7 days a week, with every second Sunday off, the men of Sudbury supplied 95% of the Allies' demand. They extracted more nickel during the war than in the first 55 years of their history. In 1942, 4,000 men were hired in Sudbury's mines, and 4,000 more quit their job from exhaustion, despite what were now the highest salaries in the country. But for the workers of Sudbury, the sweetest victory was most likely the accreditation of their leftist union, the Mine Mill and Smelter Workers Union in 1944, after 60 years of struggle. The fact that Stalin's Russia was fighting alongside the Allies fostered a more tolerant attitude in America towards unions with communist allegiance. And so the flying fortresses that firebombed German civilians in Dresden and dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima were plated with Union nickel. Those events put an end to the war, but not to deaths in the mines. That same year, a shaft cable broke at the Paymaster mine in Timmins. 16 men fell 500 meters to their deaths. The cable had rusted from the inside. No one was ever held to account.
To the aircraft industry, who require nickel-containing alloys having great strength as well as high resistance to fatigue or shock, or which will resist...
The war was good business for the mining companies, as was the reconstruction of Europe. In addition, nickel now entered into the manufacture of all kinds of day-to-day hardware. All this to the benefit of Inco, which still set world nickel prices. Our mining companies got richer, but they wouldn't be sharing their extra wealth. Their directors looked to invest in countries where mining laws were even more lax, with a penchant for non-democratic countries. Noranda in Chile, Inco in Indonesia, Falconbridge in the Dominican Republic, where it was granted a perpetual tax reduction. Our governments hardly claimed any of this spiraling wealth for themselves. Instead, they encouraged the formation of a private parallel universe whose global capital was Toronto. 60% of the world's mining companies were listed on its exchange. It's in this city that industrial predators of natural resources are bought, sold, taken over, and merged. The stock exchange. Every year, the mining world celebrates its extravagant prosperity there. Towards the end of the 60s, a protest movement was shaped to try to undermine the mining companies' impunity. Those most directly concerned took the first steps. Sudbury's mining unions discovered that half their men died younger than the national average. So did 1/3 of the city's population. Human health was the main issue that fueled a strike led jointly by Falconbridge and Inco workers.
In 1969, there was 18,000. 18,000 on strike for Local 6500. It was the biggest local in North America at that time. Nobody moved in or out. The police they brought 5 detachments of police with dogs and the works in, and they were supposed to open the picket lines. They didn't move on them. It wasn't about money. It was about being treated like a human being in the workplace and about protecting your life and your health. They were all high on lung cancer. And we finally proved that the lung cancers were related to the silica dust, probably, but in the gold mines, like all of mining, it's not only that, it's silica dust, it's cadmium, arsenic. There were so many carcinogens, we didn't know which one was causing it. And we finally won it. Now we've progressed, of course. We've got union-appointed safety inspectors in all the departments, and things have changed, but I tell you, that's only in recent years and only because of the union. In the gold mines alone, we compensated $500 million went to widows. $500 million that was rightly theirs, which was denied them, and we had to fight and fight and fight and get them. In most cases, it didn't go to the victim, it went to the survivors. So if you say, my figure, of 10 times that, there's probably 20,000 died of occupational diseases, really.
20,000 deaths, like in a war. The mining companies were just as hard on the communities living on their concessions as they were on their employees. In 1968, the small towns surrounding Sudbury still had no sewer systems, aqueducts, or sidewalks. They were just as frugal towards the state as they were towards civil society. In 1973, while Inco owed the government $300 million in taxes, it paid its shareholders $300 million. Payment of taxes was systematically deferred from year to year. Their political opponents began calling the mining companies corporate bums. Finally, in the mid-70s, Inco paid its municipal taxes to Sudbury for the first time. And even then, only on the value of the buildings on its land. This practice continues in all mining towns to this day.
We have an act called an Aggregates Act in the province of Ontario. You have to pay the city in which you're operating, Sudbury, you have to pay us 7 cents for every ton of gravel that you scrape off your property to sell to contractors. Okay? But I don't get 1 penny from any of the minerals that are taken out of the ground here and processed and sent abroad. I don't get 1 penny.
The only thing the municipality gets from the mine is they can tax the buildings. But how many buildings are there in a mine? In Holland, your mine had 700 miles of tunnels and some buildings. So the wealth goes south. And then the communities are left in a situation, they have to pay for the infrastructure when the trucks go up and down the roads with the ore. That's the responsibility of the municipality. And then when the mine shuts down, the community has to go and beg Queen's Park, beg Ottawa for help.
So what does the mayor do in the absence of that? Well, the mayor puts on his sackcloth, he puts his ashes on his head, he takes his tin cup, and I go begging to the mining companies for money. Please, sir, would you give us some money to help build a water plant? Please, sir, will you give some money to help build a track? So I beg. That's what I do. So I have developed a new skill. It's called begging.
This persistent government spinelessness also allowed foreign corporations to acquire large Canadian mining companies. In the fall of 2006, Vale, a Brazilian company, took over Inco. That same fall, Xstrata, a German-Swiss firm, took control of Falconbridge Noranda. These 2 Canadian companies could have merged to form a major global mining complex.
Falconbridge and Inco were international mining giants. Their reputation, they invested in the region. They weren't sweethearts. They were tough guys, but they were international players, and they were allowed to be taken over by Xstrata, as the corporate raider, and Vale with no commitments at all to the region. And so now we've lost our ability as a country to have big international players. And we see what Xstrata and Vale, they took the resources, the greatest base metal resources in North America, and they're putting nothing back. It's you talk to anybody, not just Northerners, not just miners. You talk to corporate executives in Toronto, and they'll say what happened here was a crime.
Ils ont cherché à se fusionner. Mais tu as des offres, ce qu'ils appellent des offres publiques d'achat hostiles. Les actionnaires, à un moment donné, quand tu te fais donner une plus-value de 35-40 %, la fierté canadienne, là, elle prend le bord, puis que la fierté québécoise prendrait le bord. Peu importe la fierté. On est vraiment dans des opérations boursières où les multinationales, 3-4 géants miniers, vont contrôler la planète minière au train où ça va.
In 2009, the Brazilian firm Vale set off a strike in Sudbury by demanding a radical overhaul of its workers' collective agreement, a first in 60 years. The company contested workers' participation in profits and imposed pension plan cutbacks for new workers. Up to that time, these had been established union gains.
You know, mining's been in our blood for many, many years, yes. I'm the last generation alive. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father have all been fighting for what we have today, our way of life today. And we're still fighting. And it's sad to see that we are still fighting for things that were fought for back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and on.
What's at stake is the history of our fathers, of our grandparents, the people who worked in the mines, who gave up their lives. You know, some 700 fatalities at Inco in their 100-year history. Those people gave up their lives, they gave up everything to put on the table what we have today. We'll never give it up.
Ten years earlier, Mike Harris's Conservative Ontario government had legalized the hiring of replacement workers, scabs.
How long have you been here?
Me, 39 years.
On the picket line?
Hey, it feels like it.
Feels like it.
No, we're on a 12-hour shift.
July 13th last year.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's when we went on strike.
July 13th, that means 10 months.
10 months.
Going on 11.
10 months and change.
11 months.
Okay.
Yeah. What does he want?
She wants to reinforce that there are only 8 allowed on the line and telling you that these guys here are not picketing.
No, they're doing
Today, there can be more than 8 striking workers at a time on a picket line. So the presence of our camera crew is a problem here.
So they're saying because of your 4 people in your crew, it's too much for our picket line.
Yes, but we are not miners.
That's correct.
Picketers can still keep scabs from entering the factory lot in their vehicles, but only for 8 minutes. A pretense of a picket line. The balance of power has been destroyed.
C'est très difficile à être civil avec quelqu'un qui vient prendre ta job. Toi, tu vois, ta famille t'apprend à crever de faim, puis lui, il vient prendre ta job avec un gros sourire sur sa face. Le gouvernement, il vient pas nous aider. Puis quand le gouvernement vient pas t'aider, ça encourage la compagnie à en rentrer d'autres, puis d'en rentrer d'autres, puis d'en rentrer d'autres. Me dire, on est rien que des hommes qui veulent aller travailler. On dirait, pour nous autres, ça semble pas si compliqué. On est des bons gars qui veulent travailler, on est qualifiés sur nos jobs. Je pense que le Canada, on est les meilleurs mineurs qu'il n'y a pas.
There were no longer 18,000 workers, as there had been in 1969, but 3,000. Times had changed. Machines had replaced men. Inco's employees no longer represent more than 5% of Sudbury's workers. So a Brazilian company was able to tear up a collective agreement in a climate of general indifference. Before the conflict began, nickel traded at $50,000 a ton. Then, as the strike dragged on, the price dropped to $5,000 a ton. The strike seemed to suit the company's interests. Canada's exports of raw ore have increased 15-fold in 50 years. The volume of transformed ore has remained the same. Thus, we are selling more and more untreated ore.
We create the resources, we have the expertise, and they make money doing it. But they just want to make more money in China. My argument is these resources, at the end of the day, belong to the people of Ontario, they belong to the people of Canada, and we have a right to benefit from them. And if Xstrata doesn't want to play as a good corporate citizen, then I don't think they should be here.
But you know what? Why aren't we producing in Quebec for the people of Quebec products from nickel or copper or gold or hospital supplies? We could produce all kinds of stuff for the people. and make money for the company. No, we take and send it all to the States, and then we buy it back at twice the value or 3 times the value it was when we sold it as a raw material. Stupid. We've never grown up.
Xstrata still sends its nickel over to Christiansand in Norway to be refined. Okay, precious metals from Inco goes to Clydach in Wales to be refined. Okay, so with public ownership, the accountability, the political accountability for demanding that our resources be taken from the ground to the final stage right in our community. That was one of the advantages I saw for public ownership, to determine the path on which our resources would be used for the benefit of Canadians. That's the goal.
Les mines qui étaient la crème sur le gâteau, visibles, là, les plus faciles, tout ça, ça a été nettoyé. Ou en tout cas, ça achève. On ne peut pas demander aux corporations minières, qui sont des entreprises privées dont les bureaux chefs ne sont même pas chez nous, dans les 9/10 des cas, de se préoccuper de la population québécoise. C'était pas leur problème. Leur problème, c'était de faire de l'argent le plus possible parce qu'on leur avait concédé nos richesses minières. Ils les ont siphonnées de leur mieux.
Le gouvernement du Québec est propriétaire de la ressource minière. C'est notre fiduciaire, c'est notre gérant, c'est notre courtier. Lui, il peut intervenir. Et c'est souvent le drame des États, c'est création d'emplois, développement à court terme, prédomine par rapport à développement durable, contrôlé, encadré, une vision, des retombées économiques dans le milieu, acceptabilité sociale, c'est nouveau. Et c'est pas le gouvernement qui amène ça, c'est parce qu'il se fait pousser dans le derrière.
With private ownership in this country comes all the privileges of private ownership. They can do what the fuck they want whenever they want to do it.
Parce que nous, on récupère les dégâts environnementaux, les passifs, les cicatrices, les trous. On récupère les infrastructures qui sont abîmées dans les villes puis qu'il faut payer comme citoyen. Puis la vraie question est sous quel angle on va les prendre. Puis qu'on parle de mines ici, qu'on parle de gaz de schiste, qu'on parle de forêt, on est toujours dans le même modèle de développement où on prend la ressource, puis nous autres, on récupère des miettes. Puis ces miettes-là, ils couvrent même pas le coût de restauration des sites qui ont été saccagés.
Until 1979, the law prevented anyone from suing Inco for environmental damages.
I did the calculations, the amount of profit that Inco made and the amount of ecological damage that they caused. And when I calculated the two, all we owed them was $2.75 and bus fare to get the hell out of town.
Est-ce que c'est considérable l'impact de l'histoire minière sur le territoire?
Moi, en fait, notre intervention là, au ministère, c'est vraiment au niveau de chaque projet minier, d'arriver à regarder, bon, est-ce que c'est un projet d'ampleur? Quand c'est un projet d'ampleur, là, c'est assujetti à toute la procédure d'étude d'impact. Donc, ça, c'est les projets majeurs. Les projets de moindre envergure, c'est des projets qui vont être assujettis quand même à des autorisations environnementales. On demande une étude de répercussion environnementale, on demande comment ils vont faire, les plans et devis, on évalue l'ensemble des travaux qu'ils vont faire.
That was the person in charge of the environment in mining heaven. Her job really consists of handing out licenses to pollute. For example, to this factory we're flying over. The Horn Smelter, owned by what used to be Noranda, now Xstrata. The last copper smelter in Canada. 25 million tons of sulfur smoke spewed from its smokestacks. It was one of America's biggest polluters. Copper is no longer easy to find in Quebec. So, the smelter is now a multi-purpose incinerator extracting precious metals from dumping grounds, even from the U.S. dumps. Heavy metal galore.
Roi Noranda, tabarnak!
At the end of the 80s, our governments provided the company with a sulfuric acid factory to retrieve the sulfur from the smokestacks. This was all located close to people's homes.
Dans le quartier Notre-Dame, à tous les semaines, il y a la sirène qui est toujours comme une pratique, si on veut, là, les alertes qui sont données. Il y a eu, je pense à date, 5-6 déraillements de wagons.
When making sulfuric acid, sulfur trioxide is also produced as a byproduct. It's a lethal gas. You don't want an accident happening on a still summer night. Should an incident occur, the only advice given to the population is to go indoors, seal all the openings, and watch TV.
J'ai de la misère à imaginer, tu sais, pouf, puis rester dans ta maison, l'air va revenir par quand même de l'extérieur.
Oui, bien, c'est sûr que ça protège momentanément parce que puis on le voit très bien aussi, là, par exemple, dans tous les dosages de plomb dans les poussières qui ont été faits, etc., on se rend compte que de plomb ou d'arsenic, on se rend compte qu'il y en a beaucoup moins dans les maisons parce que l'air ne circule pas comme dehors. Il n'y a pas de vent dans les maisons, il n'y a pas de... Bon.
But smoke isn't the only problem here. Every year, the population is exposed to a rain of heavy metal contamination. 23,000 kilos of arsenic, 60,000 tons of lead, 10 tons of sulfuric acid, not to mention dioxins and furans.
On sait ce qui s'est passé il y a plusieurs années. La Noranda a été obligée de décontaminer tous les terrains parce qu'il y avait une présence anormale de plomb dans le sang des enfants puis des citoyens. Il est certain, pour avoir parlé aux gens d'Extrata, que si ça serait à refaire, il n'y aura pas de maison près de la mine.
Tu passes une belle journée à la garderie?
Oui.
Ah ouais?
Le quartier ici, il est comme hot au point de vue environnement.
Ah ouais, tout le temps. Ça n'arrête pas. Cet été, j'ai recreusé le salage à mes parents. Là. On a défait le vieux salage, puis on a tout recreusé ça pour en faire un œuf. À 3 pieds en dessous de la terre, là, il y avait à peu près 1,5 pied. Là. C'était jaune-orange, puis ça sentait rien que le souffle. Là. C'était écœurant. La fin de semaine, il n'y a pas grand monde, ça. Tu peux pas mal tout le monde, ça chauffe.
C'est une raison pour ça?
Oui. Ils sont rares, ceux qui parlent, par exemple, ceux qui veulent parler. Oui, parce que tout le monde passe le temps à les donner leur nom là, puis ils espèrent toujours d'avoir une job là à 30 pièces à l'heure, puis tout ça.
Ah, OK.
C'est pour ça que le monde... Le monde, il parle pas, ils disent rien.
Twice in the last 20 years, the company has removed the soil from the neighborhood, ripped out lawns, and replaced the gravel in the lanes.
C'est les enfants qui sont affectés. Les adultes ne sont pas affectés. Parce que les adultes, ils mangent pas de la terre. Mais les enfants, ils mangent de la terre. Ils jouent dehors avec le petit camion, le petit pelle, etc. Ils se mettent des cailloux dans la bouche. Ils ont les mains toutes sales, ils se mettent les doigts dans la bouche. Et c'est la principale, et de loin, la principale source d'exposition des enfants au plomb. C'est évident que si demain matin, tu fermes une usine où il y a 500 emplois, ça a des impacts économiques, des impacts sur le chômage, des impacts sur... qui eux-mêmes vont avoir des impacts sur la santé. Le risque des effets économiques peut être plus grand pour la santé publique là, que de l'exposition à l'arsenic à ces niveaux-là. Puis je le place toujours dans la perspective santé publique. Il y a beaucoup de logements qui n'est pas trop cher là. On a estimé que ça prendrait peut-être 70 ans pour avoir un cas de cancer du poumon de plus dans le quartier Notre-Dame. Puis la durée moyenne de séjour dans le quartier de Notre-Dame, c'est à peu près 15 ans. Donc, honnêtement, on n'a pas la capacité de faire de démonstration de ce côté-là.
In Quebec, contamination norms haven't been revised in 30 years. It's not known whether the residents of Notre-Dame have been more exposed to illness than other folks in other neighborhoods. No more studies are being conducted. You can't find what you're not looking for. Hundreds of mines throughout history have left just as many poisoned chalices behind. Mine residue sites often abandoned, whose owners are nowhere to be found. A company can easily go bankrupt, but eternity cannot. So we've become eternally responsible for this situation. When desirable metals are concentrated, so are hazardous materials. These dumping grounds wouldn't be tolerated in heavily populated areas, whereas here, between Rouen and Val d'Or, it seems like we've gotten used to the idea of being home to one of the largest chemical dumps in North America. And right here, at the spot where the water parts.
Oui, c'est tout à nous autres, c'est tout notre héritage. On devait être sur le lac. On voit que c'est tout du tailing, c'est tout du résidu minier qui a été jeté. À l'époque, ce qu'ils faisaient comme méthode, c'est qu'on agrandissait le tuyau dans le lac. Fait que tout le tailing s'en va dans le lac de Montigny. Puis toutes les mines qui alentour ont toutes fait la même chose. On jetait le tailing directement dans le lac.
OK, on remplissait le lac des résidus miniers.
C'est ça.
C'est quoi ça?
Pour moi, c'était juste un tuyau, mais là, ce qui sort là-dedans, ça a l'air d'être de l'eau qui vient en dessous, qui doit venir, je sais pas où. Rouillé de même, là, ça indique qu'il y a quelque chose qui...
Il y a une pancarte, c'est...
Ne buvez pas, c'était écrit dessus.
Ouais. Ne touchez pas cette pancarte.
À l'époque, on prenait aussi des méthodes avec du mercure pour retirer l'or. Fait que le mercure est tout dans le fond. Parce que quand tu vas jouer dans le fond de ce lac-là avec les bateaux de plaisance puis tout ça, probablement qu'ils remettent en suspension du mercure. Puis on sait que le mercure, c'est hyper toxique. Okay. Puis il y a encore des gens qui viennent se baigner dans ces sources que les autres pensent que c'est une plage.
Un siècle d'exploitation minière, un peu moins d'un siècle, là, a laissé à peu près... les versions varient, là, mettons de 150 à 400 parcs à résidus miniers un peu partout sur le territoire. De ces parcs-là, il y en a la moitié qui génèrent de l'acide, c'est-à-dire que des bactéries à l'intérieur des déchets décomposent les sulfures, ça crée de l'acidité, ça s'en va dans les cours d'eau, nappes phréatiques, les ruisseaux, ça finit dans les lacs, les rivières, ça se rend jusque dans l'Outaouais quand ça part de Rouen, puis ça passe devant Montréal, pour te dire à quel point ça peut aller loin. Ça, c'est pour les éléments les plus légers, comme par exemple l'arsenic ou le cyanure. Les métaux plus lourds s'en vont dans le fond des lacs, dans le fond des rivières, et là, la contamination est permanente.
Mais dans le fond, une mine, c'est éternel, ça.
Ben en fait, ce qui reste, c'est éternel. Les résultats de l'exploitation, ils vont rester en surface. Éternel, c'est une façon de parler parce qu'à un moment donné, en 10 000 ans, tu peux avoir un autre ère glaciaire, puis là, tu vas raboter tout ça. L'éternité est limitée, mais à l'échelle géologique, c'est pas éternel. À l'échelle humaine, on peut considérer ça peut-être éternel. Là,
mais restons humains, là.
À notre échelle, oui, ça peut avoir donné cette impression-là.
Ça veut dire qu'il va toujours falloir s'occuper de ça.
Ben oui et non, parce que si on fait le suivi pendant 10 ans, 15 ans, et on s'aperçoit qu'il n'y en a absolument pas de problème, à ce moment-là, on peut considérer que
qu'il n'y en aura jamais.
Qu'il n'y en aura pas. Ben, vous savez, entre vous et moi, il faut être là pour le savoir au moment. Hein, ça fait que...
S'il arrive, mettons, des déluges comme au Saguenay en 1998, il y a eu...
C'est une bonne question. Est-ce qu'il y aurait probablement eu des problèmes dans certains cas, dans des vieux parcs comme ça, où les digues sont plus ou moins bien entretenues, il aurait pu céder?
Je pense que l'image que toi, Richard, t'as dans la tête, c'est une vieille image. Je pense que les mines modernes ont changé. J'aimerais pouvoir changer ton image dans ta tête à toi des mines.
Ben là.
Parce que c'est sûr qu'on peut regarder en arrière.
Elle a complètement changé depuis hier.
Mais on peut regarder en arrière, mais je pense qu'il faut regarder en avant. Puis les minières modernes font des belles choses en environnement, ils sont responsables. Puis je pense qu'il faut arrêter de ramener cette image-là du passé. Elle est là, puis on va la réparer autant que possible avec des efforts comme le nôtre à Manitou Goldex.
We were given an industrial tour of the mine, courtesy of management. Of course, it looks like a model mine, safer. Nevertheless, mining is still the most dangerous job of all.
C'est un travail dur. Maintenant, c'est de plus en plus facile. Si on compare au système de minage qu'il y avait là, 40 ou 50 ans, c'est beaucoup. En ce temps, on est tous mécanisés. Fait que le travail physiquement, c'est beaucoup moins dur.
213 non-unionized workers. Who needs a union with salaries of $80,000 a year? Nowadays, some mines don't even have employees. Everything is contracted out. A strong trend in new mines.
Est-ce qu'à un moment donné, il y a un trou d'un coup sec ou il y a un blocage quelque part?
Compared to 50 years ago, 10 times fewer workers are now needed to treat the same amount of ore. Mechanization, technology, and computerization do the job now. Yet for the region, local salaries are just about the only returns to the community. And now let's talk business. This little mine brings in $750,000 a day. Here, an ounce of gold sells for 4 times what it costs to produce.
C'est sûr qu'on prend notre place et on occupe un créneau économique important, mais en même temps, on participe à nos communautés. Puis ça vaut la peine d'être dit. Peut-être qu'on ne le dit pas assez. On est discret.
Bon, bien. On va vous aider. OK. Merci beaucoup.
How sweet it is. Discretion has attained unsuspected heights. Over the last 10 years, the company that owns Goldex paid 5% tax on its profits. That's 5 or 6 times less than the Canadian industry average. And when it comes to royalties, despite the fact that these non-renewable mineral deposits are public property, the vast majority of mining companies operating in Quebec paid no royalties between 2002 and 2008, although they generated $17 billion in wealth. That's according to Quebec's Comptroller General. In reality, government expenditures to the mining sector are continually on the rise. The benefits it derives from the sector are constantly decreasing.
L'industrie minière est une grande participante au développement des communautés la plupart du temps où elle s'implante. Il y a beaucoup de communautés qui ont été développées, qui ont été améliorées avec l'industrie minière. Ça, on le voit un peu partout dans les villes minières.
But sometimes the industry gets lucky, as it did here. The Goldex mine extended a pipe 20 kilometers in order to spread the liquid byproduct of its rock crushing process over a very problematic mine residue site.
Donc, en partenariat avec la compagnie minière, nous, on fournit un site dégradé. Eux nous fournissent le matériel pour corriger les erreurs du passé.
Puis ce matériel-là, c'est quoi?
Ça, en fait, c'est seulement de la roche broyée avec de l'eau. Il y a 50 de roche broyée, 50 d'eau qui sort du
c'est pas
tuyau.
toxique.
Absolument pas toxique, non.
Puis en versant ça sur le site de dépôt minier toxique,
oui,
ça fait quoi?
Eau, air, sulfure, tu produis de l'acide. Là, si on enlève l'air en mettant des résidus pour empêcher la...
OK, l'air touche plus à...
L'air touche plus aux résidus, comme tu dis, justement. On peut stopper le phénomène.
Est-ce que votre ministère est déterminé à régler les problèmes des sites à résidus miniers, les quarantaines?
Oui. Le ministère s'est engagé pour, d'ici 2017, complètement restaurer tous les sites qu'on dit abandonnés au Québec. 2017, on devrait les avoir tout finis au complet.
Goldex needed land to dispose of its slurry. This project cost the company next to nothing, but it cost us $35 million. And we'll still have to spend several $billion to clean other sites.
C'est une lubie. Les compagnies en parlent depuis 40 ans. Le gouvernement en parle, et beaucoup ces temps-ci. Ils auraient 7 projets en route. Sauf que le problème, c'est qu'au Québec, et je pense partout ailleurs dans le monde, là où ils sont aux prises avec le même genre de résidus, il n'y a pas d'exemple de parc à résidus acidogène qui a été restauré, réhabilité de façon scientifiquement prouvée. C'est-à-dire là que ça prend 20 ans après pour voir ce qui se passe.
The color parts of the map correspond to Quebec's territories held by mines. Under claim, 225,000 claims. The most populated part of the BTB is under claim. Even the core of its cities is subject to being blown up.
C'est étrange comme concept, jusqu'à un certain... puis bizarre en même temps, et anachronique aussi, parce que si vous regardez l'ensemble des titres émis par un gouvernement, que ce soit le gouvernement du Québec ou autre, c'est le seul titre qui s'acquiert de cette façon-là, de façon unilatérale, de par la seule volonté de l'individu ou de la compagnie. Si vous voulez avoir un lot pour faire une villégiature, vous allez demander avoir un bail, vous allez demander des terrains agricoles, vous pouvez les acheter du gouvernement, obtenir des lettres patentes. Si vous voulez avoir une pourvoirie, vous demandez. Puis il y a des normes, des règles. Un permis de forestier, bien, vous le demandez. Ainsi de suite. Mais pas pour les claims. Les claims, le gouvernement ne fait rien. Il n'a rien à dire. Ce que les gens n'aiment pas, c'est cette préséance presque absolue des droits du détenteur de claim par rapport aux autres utilisations du territoire. Pensez aux aires protégées. En pratique, ce que vous voyez, les aires protégées font le tour des claims. Alors, c'est facile à créer des aires protégées là où il n'y a pas de claim.
Only 6% of Abitibi's natural territory is protected. We're in the Pichilemu forest, in the heart of mining country between Val-d'Or and Malartic. The government selected this area to create a protected zone. But the fact that it's claimed by the mining companies prevents the project from being carried out.
Bien, la rivière Piché, ce qu'il y a de particulier, à mon point de vue, c'est que c'est des immenses marais. Donc, c'est une halte migratoire pour les canards, les outardes. C'est aussi un lieu de nidification au-dessus d'une centaine d'espèces. 125 espèces ont été recensées ici. Ça fait que c'est un lieu assez particulier parce qu'il y a beaucoup de biodiversité.
In addition, only a few kilometers away, they're developing a huge mining site, the Osisco Project.
Fait que là, à tous les printemps, il va y avoir un gros coup d'eau parce que c'est des quantités énormes d'eau qui va avoir d'accumuler, qui va se déverser. En théorie, ça ne devrait pas être toxique, mais ça, c'est en théorie. En général, ce qu'on s'aperçoit, c'est que souvent, quand il y a ces déversements-là, surtout, ça va donner un grand coup d'eau. Puis le ruisseau Raymond a été contaminé par les anciennes mines durant des dizaines et des dizaines d'années. Donc, tout le sédiment contaminé de métaux lourds risque d'être remis en suspension et s'en venir ici dans la rivière Piché. C'est probablement le scénario qui va se produire, puis là, on va dire que c'est un accident.
Malartic, a small town not far from Val-d'Or, has seen 7 mines open and close in its short history. Despite all the wealth created here, it has still become the poorest city in the region, losing half its population. Even the local Tim Hortons had to close. In circumstances like those, any project offering 400 to 500 jobs would be welcome. The parade is led by Mr. Corbeil. When he's not a government minister, he works for the mines. A very efficient go-between when it comes to facilitating certain touchy projects, like expropriating people from their neighborhood to make room for private enterprise.
Les maisons qui sont placardées, là, ça, ils vont être détruits, eux autres. Là.
Ah, c'est qu'on voit des plywood, là?
Oui, oui, oui.
C'est détruit.
Ça va être détruit, ça, carrément.
OK, ils ont acheté une maison.
Oui.
Le trou va être ici.
Oui,
Vous êtes dans le trou?
on est en plein dans le trou, ici.
Mais c'est quoi le projet minier? Vous pouvez nous expliquer qu'est-ce qu'ils entendent faire ici, là?
Le projet minier d'Osisco? Oui. Ouais, eux autres, ils disent qu'ici, là, sous terre, c'est encore très riche, mais c'est un minerai à basse teneur d'or. Fait qu'ils ont décidé, donc, qu'ils vont opérer quand même, mais basse teneur, là, attendez-vous pas, ils vont en déplacer de l'air, là. Ils sont supposés usiner 55 000 tonnes de minerais par jour. Le moulin de la Hisse Malartic, c'est qui était considéré dans le temps comme un gros moulin, là, il passait 2000 tonnes par jour. Ici, ils vont passer 55 000 tonnes par jour. Ils vont utiliser 11 tonnes de cyanure par jour. Ils vont prendre 25 millions de litres d'eau par jour. Ça vous fait un peu prendre conscience de l'ampleur du projet. Mais le 55 000 tonnes par jour, là, il est pris dans 155 000 tonnes de minerais. Autrement dit, il y a bien du minerai stérile. Bien, pour avoir le 55 000 tonnes, là, ils vont casser 150 000 tonnes par jour pendant 10 ans de temps. Fait qu'imaginez-vous le trou que ça va faire ici.
Comment gros qu'il va être le trou?
Ah, mon Dieu, il y a au moins presque 2 km de long par à peu près 1500 mètres de large. Ça va être un énorme trou. La tour Eiffel, elle va faire direct dans le trou, puis tu verras pas le top.
The project is so big the government feels obliged to hold public hearings to determine whether the destruction of an entire neighborhood might affect the environment. But as the hearings continue, they keep moving houses. Osisco has already spent $200 million. At this stage, the government hasn't yet authorized exploitation of the mine. It's not known under what circumstances the company could have obtained the state's blessing.
Ces gens-là, ils sont pas plus contents, mais ils sont obligés de se tasser pour X raisons. Là, je pense que si on prend le bien de la collectivité au complet, c'était mieux qu'ils s'en aillent. Parce que dans notre bad luck, il ne faut pas oublier une affaire, on est chanceux dans notre bad luck. Dans le sens que l'or est en dessous des maisons. Fait que la minière se trouve comme obligée de payer tout ça. Ça y coûte des millions, puis pour te dire des centaines de millions pour ça. Mais si l'or serait 1 kilomètre plus loin, on aurait zéro ben bord. On aurait eu zéro de la minière, on aurait eu zéro de subventions, on aurait eu zéro des gouvernements. On aurait encore les vieilles maisons, on aurait encore le vieux quartier, puis on serait encore surendetté, là.
Strange, isn't it, how a town's prosperity could stem from the annihilation of one of its neighborhoods? The law allows expropriation for reasons of public utility, like building a hospital or a road. Yet here, a private company, armed with the power to expropriate, was able to buy or demolish all the houses in the neighborhood at market value, by mutual agreement, of course. Everyone except one, Ken Massey, who evidently doesn't understand this new concept of social acceptance.
On voyait des polices chez nous. On voyait des polices, puis ils m'ont sorti de force. Ils ont défoncé la porte à coups de pied, puis ils ont essayé de négocier. Moi, je leur ai dit que j'étais dans mes droits de rester chez nous, puis que je faisais pas de trouble, puis que je restais là. Donc, ils m'ont ramassé, ils m'ont élevé, ils m'ont traîné jusqu'à l'auto.
Once you have made a discovery and you have a feasibility study that says it would be economic to mine it, then it's pulling together the right people that will handle relations with the people who live in the area, people who know how technically to develop a mine and operate it, and having the financing. But again, people are willing to do that in Quebec because it's as far as an investment climate, it's a very low-risk area. The government's not going to change the rules. The government is not going to give you troubles. You do things right, and you'll be able to run a mine.
As far as mining companies are concerned, Quebec isn't going to change the rules. Quebec isn't going to make trouble. There's very little financial risk involved here. But for those who will have to live beside the hole and have invested so much in their homes...
Bien, j'espère que ça dévaluera pas trop. On veut rester ici encore 3-4 ans, nous autres au moins, à l'âge qu'on a. Bien, ça prend de l'argent pour aller vivre ailleurs. Tu sais, la vie est plus la même. Il n'y a plus de voisins. Le monde qui est à côté, c'est au Cisco, la maison. Ils logent des gens qui vont travailler pour eux autres. Puis ils se font construire des maisons. Eux autres, ils ne resteront pas là-dedans, là. Hein? Fait que des voisins, on n'en a plus. On est tranquille, OK, mais il y a tranquille puis tranquille, là, un bout à tout, là.
En tout cas, ça, c'est évident. Là. On voit quasiment 1 sur 2 qui est à vendre.
Oui.
C'est parce qu'ils sont pas bien là.
Ben, c'est parce qu'ils sont pas bien ou ils ont envie de faire un coup d'argent. Moi, j'ai vu des gens de ce quartier-là, encore hier, une madame, entre autres, qui me disait qu'elle, tout ce qu'elle voulait, là, c'est que la minière, elle paye une femme de ménage 2 fois par année pour faire le ménage dans sa maison. Elle voulait pas s'en aller de là parce que ça fait 50 ans qu'elle reste là puis il n'y a pas question qu'elle s'en aille. Tu sais, je veux dire, la poussière, là, elle s'en va pas là, elle fait le tour, elle passe par-dessus aussi. Il va en avoir, mais probablement qu'il va y avoir moins de neige là durant le reste de l'année que nous autres, juste à cause de l'effet du mur. C'est la nature qui est de même.
Moins de?
Moins de neige, à cause de la montagne qu'il y a là, qu'il n'y avait pas avant. Là.
Bien sud.
Tu sais? Oui. Ouais.
La neige, elle vient du nord?
Bien, ça dépend, parce que tu vois, c'est quand le vent est sud qu'ils n'ont pas le droit de blaster. Fait que ça y joue.
Ah, OK.
Okay.
Moi, c'est ça qui est ma plus grosse crainte, que mec qui commence à blaster, là, que ça qui est ma peur que ça arrive, ça.
Il a blasté hier, c'était hier, là, 4h15. 4h20, tout ça. Ça fait, il dit, mes amis. Fait que c'est quoi, là? On se dit, c'est pas des gros blasts, ça, là. Mais qui blastent, là, de 55 000 tonnes par chiffre, là. C'est des rings, ça, des trous du pouce, c'est supposé, là. Il en rentre de la poudre là-dedans.
Lui, c'est un ancien mineur. Ça fait
que 40 ans là-dedans.
Il sait quoi qu'il parle, là.
Ça va faire boubou.
Je m'imagine. Il y en a qui disent, ça va faire boubouout, mais boubouout, là.
Ça va dérouler des gros boubouttes.
Les mines font souvent miroiter l'aspect de la peur. Bon, mais si ça marche pas ici, on va aller ailleurs. Regarde, il est ici le minerai. Tu pourras pas aller ailleurs. Il est ici le minerai. Si t'en veux, là, c'est ici que tu vas le prendre. Voici nos conditions pour que tu y aies accès. Puis ça, collectivement, on y gagne tous. Puis ils vont faire un petit peu moins d'argent, mais ils vont faire de l'argent pareil.
Le fond, pourquoi ils demandent rien? C'est qu'ils ont peur d'épeurer l'industrie minière. Ben, l'industrie minière, elle va te respecter. L'industrie minière, si tu lui demandes quelque chose de logique, elle va te respecter. Dans le moment, elle te regarde comme un colonisé. Elle te demande elle te regarde comme un pas bon. Elle te donne des nananes, puis toi, t'es plein de nananes.
Ça a donné des pinottes sur le territoire, en impôts ou en redevances, mais ça a donné quelques centaines de millions en salaire, OK, pour une période courte. Puis après, la ressource est partie, ça a généré des profits puis énormes. Là, les profits, le vérificateur général, les chiffres, ça a donné des profits ailleurs. Collectivement, on reste avec le trou. Puis le trou dans nos finances publiques aussi.
C'est ça que je trouve bien déplorable. On peut pas dire rien, on sait rien. Fait que comment tu veux destiner ou dire quelque chose? Tu peux pas?
L'argent qu'ils vont faire alentour de notre village, personne n'a aucune redevance.
On l'a rien, ils vont tout prendre là, s'il y a 2 milliards, mettons. Ils vont prendre 2 milliards, puis nous, on va rester avec le calice de trou, puis pas une scène. Ça fait 50 ans que je reste 50 ans, puis il n'y a plus une crise de scène, il n'y a plus rien, un trou, puis tiens, va-t'en, où tu voudras. Nous autres, on l'a fait notre argent, essaye même pas de nous trouver. Tu sais? Moi, un petit coup, je suis pogné ici, là, avec un crise de trou, j'ai pas eu 5 cents avec ça, puis tout le monde est content. La ville est content, on a eu 500 000 pour notre eau, nous autres, c'est ça qu'on voulait, puis on se calisse du reste. Tu sais, c'est comme vraiment stressant. C'est stressant au bout.
S'il se fait rien, si personne ne se prend en main, Dans 20 ans d'ici, la BTB est toute défigurée. Là. Ça va être asbestos par 20 fois. Ça va être Malartic par 10 fois. Donc, tu viendras plus en Abitibi, tu vas venir dans le trou.
The hole in Malartic will never be filled, nor will the future open-pit mines in Abitibi. It's as if we're the last people who'll ever live in this place. For the sake of the generations to come, we must assess what needs to be protected. Even though mining companies have been pioneers in distant territories, it doesn't give them the right to act in Wild West fashion. Mineral resources are, by definition, publicly owned, and the contract that binds our government to the mining sector is almost legalizing corporate vandalism. It's astonishing the amount of money that has eluded us in the past and continues to do so. We could put it to such good use. Almost all the profits are handed over to the shareholders who don't even know we exist. This mining law must be rewritten. Protection of the territory and respect for civic development must now govern all mining activity. This is increasingly the case around the world, like in Australia, Ecuador, and Botswana. If not, the North will be ransacked and the St. Lawrence Valley as well, because gas and oil are underground and therefore subjected to the same mysterious law. It's about time we became masters in our own house.